you imagine being interviewed by the world's greatest interviewer? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my return guest is Larry Grobel. Are you talking to me? Yes, we are, Larry. You can catch the show here on my YouTube channel, or you can catch me on Guys Radio on KCAA here in Southern California, and my worldwide podcast, Guys TV, Guys Radio. Thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, we're back with the GOAT, the greatest interview of all time, in my opinion, and many others, Larry Grobel. Welcome back, Larry.
Nice to be here, Robert.
Let me tell you a little bit about Larry before we move on. One, he's considered the interviewer's interviewer. He's written 29 books, short stories, screenplays, poetry. He's got over 36 Playboy featured interviews with some of the top stars in the world and people who frankly did not want to be interviewed. People like Brando, De Niro, Pacino, Streisand, more and more. Oscar winners, Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, sports figures, musicians, artists, poets, and again, many who did not want to be interviewed. So it's my pleasure to bring onto the show once again the Mozart of interviewers, as per Joyce Carol Oates, Larry Lawrence Grobel. So I thought we'd start, Larry, with some observations from our first interview. So number one, my wife asked me after I got out of the interview, she said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "You know what? It was like blue fishing." And she said, "Tell me about that." So when you go blue fishing, you do all your preparation. You find your spot in the bow of the boat, and you get there early, and you bring the right bait, and then you go out to sea. And then as soon as you're all prepared, and then as soon as that bluefish hits your hook, off it goes. And then you're trying to reel it in. You're wrestling with it. You're giving it some line. You're pulling it back in, and eventually you reel it in and you land it. And then there's a victory. You feel really good about that. And what I felt was, I was kind of holding the line and Larry was running out there because I kind of let the interview get away from me a little bit. But then I learned that, Larry, you are kind of a fisherman on your own in how you do this. And I think there's an analogy between sports fishing and interviewing in that, and hunting, because you really go out there, you identify who your target is, you lay the traps, you get them out there, and you do everything you can to reel them in and open them up and land. And then you celebrate your victory because, you know, it takes greatness to recognize greatness. And I think you recognize that in yourself. And I say that in a very respectful way, because to do what you do at the level you do it at, you have to have greatness. And as an interviewer, interviewers have an advantage in some ways in that we talk to so many different people, and most of those people have an expertise in one area. So that was kind of my take on working with you and talking to you and meeting you for the first time, Larry, and my respect for you in terms of what you do. Thoughts?
Yes, my question is, when you finished talking with your wife, did you say, I landed it, or I didn't? Did you feel satisfied? I mean, we're back here again. So obviously you feel unsatisfied with the first half of the interview because you didn't get where you wanted to go. Is that correct?
I asked Larry, I asked you, well, how did it go? And you said it was fine. Now, to me, fine is good, but it's not great. And I have high standards for myself as for you yourself. And I felt myself that and it was my own fault, I was chasing a little bit. And we can get into some of that. I'll give you a couple examples. You were answering questions. You were so articulate. You were answering questions that I had written down to be asked later about kind of in different kind of segments. And it threw me off a little bit. And I also asked you, I phrased the second question incorrectly. What I asked was, what's it like? How do you do it in terms of interviewing all these famous people who don't want to be interviewed? And really what I wanted to ask, but I was nervous, I should have asked you, how does it feel to do what you do? So overall, I thought it did go fine, but I felt that I was trying to follow your interviewing protocols the way you do it in written form. And on my show, I really just needed to do it the way I want to do it and just let it fly. Be prepared, but let it fly and be relaxed.
Well, I do the same, but you have to understand what I do when I edit it, which is a different story. I then take it and make it look like it's a conversation that's happened. But I think you have to go with where your subject is going. If you have the time. I mean, this is the big dilemma with getting an interview with someone is, do you have the time and the luxury of time really to be able to let them go on and on And it happens all the time with me. Almost every single time I ever do an interview, the questions I have, let's say my first page of questions, I'll ask a question and they'll start answering what's on page 5 for me, where 100
Exactly.
questions later. I let that happen. What I often end up doing is, as I'm listening, if I really know where my questions are, is I'll start moving my pages over and I end up going from page, let's say my third question to my 45th question. And then I'll come back. Because I'll circle the question I'm going to. I'll maybe cross out one of the last questions I asked, so I can go back and cover those other areas. But when I edit it, it's going to seem like a seamless thing. So hopefully, you're not wrong in thinking about uh, going listening to somebody skip around and you go, oh man, I want to talk about that later. You can get back to it, don't worry about that, but let the person go with it, because that's where his mind or her mind is going at the time. And especially when you're just getting into it, if
Mhm.
you're into me, if we do this interview every week for the next 10 weeks, you will see a difference in the way you ask me questions, and you'll see a difference in the way I answer you. Why? Because I get to know how you're asking me. I get to know what you expect. I get to see your own reaction in your eyes, even though your glasses are somewhat colored. And you'll see the same with me. So that's what a relationship starts to develop between two people. But that doesn't happen too often. When I do interviews like this or with podcasts with a few people who want to talk to me, usually it's over after the first time, and people will think, well, I landed it or I didn't land it. When you ask me what I think, it would be hubris of me to say, oh, I think I was great. You're asking me about the interview that I've just given you. I can't answer that.
Well,
I can,
it wasn't really about my asking you. I'm sorry, but you said I could interrupt. It wasn't about our interview per se. It was about just your art of interviewing. It takes a greatness to recognize greatness, and you recognize the greatness in your subjects. And you also mentioned something at the end of our last interview, which is about, I might not be the great sculptor like Henry Moore, but I managed to take him on and I could do it. So you are recognizing your own greatness, and that is a good thing. And you are great, and it's proven. So I'm not kissing up to you. I'm just saying these are the facts. So I'm learning from the best, and
well,
that's awesome. Hmm?
no, what I'm saying, Robert, is that when you asked me how did it go, and I said fine, that's I don't know how else to answer that without looking at what you end up doing, because what we may be doing now versus what you may cut and edit is really what's going to show. So I mean, it's like I might think, oh, it's the same thing with any of my interviews. If I give an interview for the perfect example is the one I did with Capote. I mean, I gave to Playboy with the nerve to tell them this is going to be the most quoted interview ever published in any magazine for that year, and they ended up not publishing it at all. They rejected it. I bought it back. Well, that's what happens. I mean, sometimes you think you're doing great, and sometimes nobody else thinks so. In that case, I think I was right, because the book is evidence of that.
Yep.
But it's hard to judge yourself. I think it really is. I mean, I'm hoping the only thing I can do is say, how did it go for you? How was
Okay.
it for you?
Well, I thought it went well, but I have a standard for myself and I wanted it to be even better. The way I do interviews on the shows, I don't do a lot of post-production. I want it to be raw. I want it to be a conversation, and I want it to be the questions that the audience would want us to ask each other. And I want it to be the questions that I want to ask just out of curiosity as an interviewer. And I also want to be the ask the questions that you would expect and want to be asked, if there are any of those. So I was somewhat satisfied, but I thought we could have more of a conversation this time. And I think the vibe's already different. The other thing I noticed about you, Larry, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you seem to have the capacity, from based on your experience, to be coding while you listen.
That's interesting, but I'm not sure. Define what coding is.
Well,
In other
doing
words,
kind of some of the editing, like when you do your coding after a written interview and you break everything down, you make your notes and all that, I could almost feel your thought process because you listen very, very carefully and very specifically to words. Words really matter. It's not just the vibe coming out. You really listen to what the other person's saying. And I felt a little bit like, oh my God, I have to be really careful of how I say things because I could get it wrong. And I did get it wrong on that second question. And that immediately woke me up during the interview.
Well, the only time I think big advice I give to people who are trying to learn to interview, and you haven't done this, but is never give a subject a chance to say yes or no.
Right.
Because if you give that kind of thing, they'll just say yes or no, and you don't get any answer. That was my big mistake with Willie Shoemaker. I mean, Willie Shoemaker, the great jockey, just didn't have stories to tell, and I would just say, "Oh, when you did this, when you rode this, when you won the Kentucky Derby, how is that? That must have felt great, didn't it?" And he'd go, "Yeah, it did." Boom, there it goes. So but other than that, if I'm coding, as you say, it's possible. It may not be as conscious as you think it is. It's my big concern sometimes when I'm doing something is if I'm not listening, if my mind wanders for a minute or two,
Right.
that's dangerous because then the subject is talking and you're like, oh, I just went into space, or I'm thinking about another question, or I'm thinking about another area and I didn't hear what you just said. So I then will stutter my way into trying to get back to where we were. So I do try to listen. I think listening is, that's the art of the interview, is to be able to listen to others. That's the beauty of learning how to do this. And when I was teaching, I said, you may never be an interviewer, but you will learn how to listen to other people. And that alone will advance you in your jobs throughout life, because people aren't used to being listened to. People always want to be the talker. They're not necessarily wanting to have to hear what you have to say. It's an ego thing with most people. So I think it's important to listen and to take it from there. It makes for a better conversation for sure.
Okay, my very special guest on Guys Radio. It's part two of Lawrence Grobel, the world's greatest interview, and I'm here trying my very best to keep up with him. Let's talk a little bit about your lessons book. Larry's got a book called You Talking to Me: Lessons Learned Along the Celebrity Trail, and I've been reading it, and it's really fantastic. And I wrote down something on lesson 21, and it was, if we don't become ourselves, then we're nothing. This was Ted Harris, and he wrote some kind of musical stuff about historical fiction that, if you connect the dots, led to what is now Hamilton on stage. He didn't write Hamilton, but he did something like it, and he just stuck with it, and he stuck with it, and he stuck with it, and he got somebody to do something with it eventually, but he could have easily have given up. So the question is who we are simply who we choose to be, and how important is it to become ourselves?
Well, if I think becoming ourselves is a lifelong process. If we make it, if we get to know who we are by the end, it's a successful life. If we are confused at the end, maybe it isn't so much. Ted Harris is an interesting example. He was my piano teacher. I was 9 years old when I first got to know him. My sister was 11. She was taking lessons. My sister was a far better piano player than I was. So I think I quit after a year because I used to say, oh, my wrists hurt, Mom, I can't practice. And I go out and play baseball or something. But Ted Harris was one of the great characters in my life. I love this man. He would come in and he was a socialist, and he knew so much about the way the world worked, politically, and he would talk about it. And he'd play, I remember his pinky would always be going up and down. And he said to me once, I had a nervous breakdown when I was 1 year old. Since then, everything has been up for me, and he charged $5 a lesson. And when my sister grew up and had a kid, and the kid became 12 and got a piano, she got Ted Harris to come teach. He still charged $5. And she said, Ted, times have changed. He says, no, if it was that's what I charge for your family, that's what I'll always charge. In other words, he was never going to be a rich man. But he wrote some songs. He wrote one that got into called "Crying in the Streets" and made it into the rhythm and blues section. But he came across this New American Library published this. I think it was the first president that William Carlos Williams did in 1936 or something for the New York World's Fair, 36-39. It never got done. And he gets to read this and he says, this is a genius. This is great. The words sing to me. So he decides he'll write the opera for it. And it's amazing. He didn't get nobody asked him to do it. And after he wrote it, he went to New Jersey. He looked up where William Carlos Williams lived. He drove out there. He sent him a record of his called Bumpo the Ballerina. He drove out and knocks on his door. And he said, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well," he says, "Did you get my record? Did you, you know?" He says, "Yeah, but it didn't make any sense." So he invites him in. Ted listens to the record, and it's on the wrong. It's a 45. It should have been a 33 or a 78, whatever. So Ted sits down, and he had a piano, and he starts singing "The First President," Benedict Arnold, da, 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 and William Carlos says, "This is great. This is terrific. No one had ever done this before." And eventually, it got done in Rutherford. But you know, I wrote a piece about this because in 1976, out of Bicentennial, I thought it was a perfect thing that the government should do is produce this opera. They didn't do it, but they hired somebody from Czechoslovakia or something to write this, and it was really amazingly stupid. But Ted just never gave up. He just believed in himself. He wrote sonatas, he wrote sonatinas, he wrote operas. He had them in a closet. They filled up the thing. It didn't matter to him. And in a sense, I feel very much inspired by that, because that's what I'm doing today. I mean, if you want to extrapolate all the lessons I learned, I said, you know what? Please yourself. Write for yourself. And Ted was that way with the, you know, he's just like, anything else he wasn't satisfied with. But if he was writing his music and he was composing, he loved it. He can, you know, if he would do piano lessons, he would enjoy that. He made just enough to survive. I'm doing that with my stories. My books, I've made a decision. I'm not going to let publishers decide what my career is going to be. I'm going to create my own career. I'm going to write my stuff. I have the opportunity to do it. I may not get readers the way I used to, but I am going to be, I'm happy. I'm happy. Every time I write a story, I read it to my wife. I'll read it to a friend. I say, hey, listen to this. I don't want to be judged in a sense. I just want to write it. And if you like it, great. If you don't, oh, well. I'll move on.
Great advice. Kind of the second part of that, and it's tangential. I could have held it back, but is who we are simply who we choose to be? And I say that in relationship to some of the interviews with the stars. In other words, Cary Grant. He was Archibald Leach, I think, and then it's been Cary Grant, and nobody's exactly like Cary Grant. Judy, and all that. And he became this character, and then he was always Cary Grant forevermore. And Mae West, you interviewed Mae West, and she was this bigger than life character, or Dolly Parton. I mean, everybody sees Dolly Parton as this bigger than life character. Is that simply who these people chose to be? Have you found that with Hollywood, working with stars, that they've led themselves in this direction and said, I can land here, or does it just happen? And is it a good thing?
Well, look, I'll give you an example. When Henry Winkler was the Fonz, he went, you know, and he was the biggest star on television at the time for Happy Days. He goes to a party and he meets George C. Scott. And George C. Scott, who he greatly admired as an actor and all this, and you know, and Henry Winkler knew that the Fonz was not exactly, you know, Brando in Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, it's a different kind of character. But what Scott said to him was, he said, enjoy it now, he says, because you may never get to hear again. And in a sense, and it was really true. I mean, Henry Winkler went on to make a few movies and stuff. You can't name them basically. And, you know, and then he became a producer, you know, and he produced a lot of stuff. But, you know, it's very difficult when you make something that is so big that you become this thing. You know, look at Bruce Springsteen. That when Bruce Springsteen got on the cover of Time and Newsweek on the same week, that was a very rare thing. And it was a mistake. It was a mistake for Time and Newsweek to do it at the same time, but they didn't know, you know. But all of a sudden, it's like, you know, you get typecast into something that this is who you are. I think Bruce Springsteen has broken out of that. I think he's changed it. It's a very difficult thing when you do something that is so big that you know, you have to break away from that. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And I think, you know, as much as we love Dolly Parton, I think Dolly Parton has has a very broad range, because she's written over 3,000 songs, you know, and, you know, we love the songs we know of her. We know her character hasn't changed too much. You know, she's this sort of bubbly, you know, woman who has been that way throughout what we've seen. But listen, I've been with these people when they're not on, and I've driven in a car with Dolly where we went to the beach and, a man, shouts at her and she says to me, "Oh, and I left my
I can
gun."
imagine.
Did I tell you this story before?
No.
Well, and she grabbed my arm because we're just walking down the beach, but she's Dolly Parton, right? She still looks that way. And this guy sitting on the bench like this, and he says, "Hey!" I don't think he knew it was her, just yeah. And I'm, this was a big guy. He looked like a football player. And Dolly grabs my arm and says, "Oh, damn," she says, "and I left my gun in my purse in your car." And I go, "Your gun?" And I'm thinking I'm gonna have to fight this guy if he approaches us. I'm gonna get killed, So but it was like it was a different Dolly. You don't think about Dolly carrying a gun, do you? But it's they're all different when you're behind the scenes. So Cary Grant, who was taking LSD, he was like he was hallucinating half the time in his life. It's a different Cary Grant than the Cary Grant that we've seen. Rock Hudson, you didn't know what Rock Hudson was gay. You didn't understand, when we were watching his persona and his character. So nobody is who they seem to be when they are on the big screen. That's that's to me a given in a sense. But we don't know that because we only know them from the big screen unless you get to spend time with them, and then they're different.
Okay. Your book, the name, it got me. You, comma, talking to me, which makes perfect sense. It's a play off of Taxi Driver, and I'm wondering if this was conscious, because the character in Taxi Driver, he listens to all the people in the cab all the time, so he is like a journalist in his own way, but he's also a vigilante. So my question to you, Larry, is: Are you a vigilante? Are you a journalist? And are you a vigilante? And was that a conscious decision to use that quote as a title of your book?
Well, the original title was going to be something Bob Knight said to me.
Get out of my car.
No, it had the word "fuck" in it though. God, I can't believe it. But I'll get it in a minute. But I struggle with titles at times. You want to come up with the right one. But with this, it was, my first book, my memoir was "You Show Me Yours." So I didn't think of it at the time. I said, "Oh, it's probably a mistake to do the next book, You, again, with starting with the word you." I did it twice. But when I was thinking about it, what am I really talking about? Is like I'm writing about what I learned from these people, what they said to me when I talked to them. So they were talking back to me. So the interview book, The Art of the Interview, is about how you do it, how you do these interviews with these people. So it's from my point of view. The other is what they said to me that may have changed my thinking in some way. It's some kind of epiphany I may have had along the way. And so it was, it was you, the subject, comma, talking to me, and that's really how I saw it. In as a title goes. As far as me being a vigilante, sure, why not? I don't take that as an insult. I mean, I do see that I'm going in, and I understand the idea of Kissinger saying I was a gunslinger, like a lone gunman going in again, to do that. I feel that way too. I feel like I'm preparing. My way of preparing is not to take a gun and make sure my bullets are all in there, but it's to take my equipment. It's to make sure I have 2 tape recorders working. It's to test them. It's to make sure the batteries are good. It's all that. It's a ritual. It's how I dress. Sometimes, I'll take my clothes with me and I'll leave it in the car, my shirt or something. Why? Because as I'm driving and I'm thinking, maybe I'm a little nervous, maybe I'm starting to sweat. I don't know, but I want to be as clean as I can be when I go in. So I'll change in the car if I feel I need to. So when I get to your door, I am focused on your opening of that door. You know what I mean? I'm there. I want to be totally present. And I think that's really, I don't want to be sort of like thinking about anything else. I don't, lately There have been people I know who have been dying. You know, I've been writing about relatives as well, and it's a difficult time in a way. If I had to go do an interview, I have to eliminate all of that. I have to stop thinking about the sadness or the tragedies or the happiness or the good, whatever it is. And I just have to just be focused on who I'm about to see. And that
Got
has
it.
to be the most important thing in my life at that moment. When I leave, I can leave and become myself again. But
Got it.
I think focus is what we're really talking about here.
Yeah. Okay. Larry Grobel, my special guest on Guys Radio. He's interviewed. Let me throw some more names. Last time I named about 30 stars: Angelina Jolie, John Voight, Sharon Stone, Kurt Russell, Harrison Ford, Mel Gibson, Patty Hearst, Warren Beatty, and many, many more. So we'll keep going with that. But I want to move over to a little bit of an offbeat topic, and that is you seem to have a real fondness for performance art. And what is the role of performance art in your life? I remember you were following this guy. You lived in his car for a couple of weeks, and that meant being in his car all the time. And is performance art all about the experience? And who is transformed? Is it the artist or is it the audience?
Okay, I'm going to answer that in 1 second. I just want to get back. I remember the title. You talking to me was originally going to be called "Don't Say Another Fucking Word." That was going to because that's what Bob Knight said to me, and I said that's a great title. And then all the women I knew, when I would, I mentioned the title, I said, "Oh, you can't use fucking." Well, I could have, and I'm sorry I didn't actually. Now, performance art. Performance art really kind of blew my mind in a lot of ways. I've always been fascinated by art. I've known artists. I've seen, and most of the art I've known was standard kind of art. Let's say sculpture, painting, drawings. Um, and along came this art in the 70s that there were happenings they were called first, and then it became performance art with people like Chris Burton, Paul McCarthy, Barbara Smith, and then there were people in Europe doing these things as well, Yves Klein. And, I mean, this guy jumped out of a 2 or 3 story building, face first or something like that, as a performance. The one the Paul McCarthy is the one who sort of like was my doppelganger, or my sort of my opposite. I mean, the person who was doing exactly the things I would never want to do, but yet I was attracted to what he was doing. So it was affecting me. And to me, art is something that is strong when it affects you, when you get an emotion out of it. When you see Guernica by Picasso, you should get an emotion from
Sure.
that. I mean, there's something about it that which makes it so great. So with this art, it was just he was doing things like shaving his body hair, and then but not just with ketchup. He would with shaving cream. He would put ketchup and mustard on. He would tape bandages around his head and stuff his mouth with 20 hot dogs, like this. And by the way, a photograph of that sells for like $30,000, $40,000. I mean,
So
it's like,
is Larry is an interview a form of performance art? And
maybe perhaps at its highest level, if you can go to that level where it's it's the interviewer should not be that present in an interview. In other words, I may be talking to an artist, interacting, but my job really is to get you to understand that person. In the interview you and I are doing, as much as we'd like to say it's a conversation, if you don't get out of me the insights that you're looking for, then it doesn't matter how bright you are, because you can always talk to a camera. You don't need to talk to anybody else. So if you're doing this, so if I'm talking to an artist, a performance artist, I'm trying to get to an understanding of what they do. Why do you do what you do? Chris Burton got shot in the arm. He had his lawyer with a rifle shoot him when he was in Irvine, and it was a shot heard around the art world. It was it made the cover. It was in Art Forum. It was in New York Magazine. It was like Esquire. I mean, everyone was right. Is this art? Is this crazy? Well, it was art. What turned out, because he became quite an amazing artist, and his work sold into the millions of dollars. And you see his work, went beyond performance. You know, he went into sculptures and lighting, and you go to the LA County Museum now and you see all of these light fixtures, you know, that are there, and everybody who gets married these days goes and takes a picture with all those, you know, the lights. That's Chris Burden's work. So there, it's hard. It's a question that I don't know if I can answer as far as seeing an interview as a performance art, because performance art is like something else. It's out there. Performance art was a one of a kind thing. It was a one off. You know, you'd go to you'd see somebody get shot in the arm. You're not going to see that again. He's not going to do that again. You know, Burden went up. You know, he would in the University in Chicago at the in a museum. He put himself in like a cocoon. You know, like and it was on the wall. He was inside this I guess plastic or whatever inside the wall. You couldn't see him, and he was just there. Now, did he come down at night? How did he go to the bathroom? He did the same thing at the Ronald Feldman Gallery, where he was, you know, they built a platform, a triangular platform at the top towards the ceiling, and he was up there. You couldn't see him. People would come in and say, okay, he's up there. You know, it was a feeling, a sense, you know, that he would do that. He, you know, there was a lot of very strange stuff these, you know, some of these people did. I went to a lot of, no, I mean, I bought an artist. Barbara Smith did this performance at she did an auction of all these different items, and one of them was she auctioned herself. You could buy her. I bought her. You know, I was the only one who bid. It was crazy. I didn't expect to get her. She came to live with me for a week. Now, theoretically, I own that person, right? I bought that work of art. I could do anything I want with her. And that's scary, isn't it? I mean, sure. When you think about what you do. And what I said to her was, I want to learn what this is all about. And you are in the middle of this. You know all the artists who are doing these things. You know what's going on. Teach me. So every day, every night, we went to another performance. We went to see these artists. We ended up going in Pasadena. There was an overpass that's where the cars go, and the overpass, there's three of them, the freeway. There was a guy who always, when he was young, always imagined looking up at the overpass and seeing some kind of image. So he wanted to create it. So he created a cock and a bull, a cock being a rooster and a bull. But he, you know, made out of cardboard, and maybe it was 20 feet high or something, so you could see it as you're driving. And like, it would be astounding as you're driving by, you look up and you see a giant bull, and you just keep going as you're driving. Did I just see that? That was his. So Barbara knew he was going to be doing this. So we went and helped him. And we were actually, I'm helping him, you know, bang it in and whatever. And it was taken down a couple hours later by the police or whatever.
So who is transformed from performance art then? Is it the artist, or is it the person who's who is it the person watching it, the consumer, if you will?
I would like to think that performance art is an intellectual art. You know, it's an idea art, although it's often very physical. So obviously the artist is being transformed. It's doing it. You know, one of the Kipper kids who married Bette Midler. That, you know, one of I went to a performance there where you walked in and there was a television monitor. The first thing you saw was a penis with two eyes over the open hole. And so it looked like a mouth, and it talked to you. It was this. He did this. So you walked in, you say, already, you know, something strange going on here. And then he goes in, and there he and his brother, I think he had, there were two of them, the Kipper kids. They were the performance was like a boxing ring, and they were each going to drink enough beer to get totally drunk, and they were going to box until they threw up or whatever. This was and here are all these people watching around. We watched them drink it. We witnessed this whole thing. Yeah, they were performing, you know, so they're obviously experiencing it, but we are watching it and are also having an experience. I saw another guy from Europe. He was a famous performance artist. He had a carcass. It was a cow carcass. And it was the cavity, you know, was open. So like, and the blood, and he would chop away with an axe, and the blood is dripping. And he had somebody from the audience. Now I guess it was somebody that must have been a friend. It wasn't going to be me, but you know, who laid down underneath it, and the blood is dripping down on this guy, and this guy's, you know, and I'm thinking, what am I seeing? but it's like, yeah, you walk away and you're disturbed and you think about it and you say, is this just bullshit, or is there something there? And some of it is bullshit, and sometimes there's something there, but it definitely affects you. It was a very strong period of the art world, and a lot of these artists have gone on and become well known. You know, they taught at UCLA. Paul McCartney and Chris Burden both became professors at UCLA and taught and went on to teach this.
Okay.
And you know,
well, just so everybody knows, it's Paul McCarthy that Larry's referring to.
Not Paul McCarthy.
Not the Beatle. Speaking of which, let's shift gears a little bit, Larry, and get into some people you've interviewed and some tips and maybe some circumstances that you faced. Missed opportunities. Did you ever have questions that you wanted to ask and you didn't during the interview? And what did you do about that? Did you go back and reconnect with the talent subject, or did you just let it slide and say, well, I didn't get that question in there this time, but maybe next time?
Well, if it was the Playboy interview, I just felt obligated to get everything I wanted in there. If there was another question I had or something wasn't answered, I would do my best to get back to them, call them, can I talk to the publicist again, say I'd like to, whatever, to get back. But there's always there's always, as you read something, as you read about it, you realize.
Any that stand out for you?
No.
That were unresolved, or
No, but I'm thinking about something I saw yesterday. I'm just saying who the person I was talking, who was. Sometimes I was thinking about, I wanted to interview this person, and I didn't know enough about that person. When you find out later, oh, they did this or they did that. I know about that? Had I interviewed? Maybe it was Aretha Franklin. Yes, I was watching Genius, the Aretha Franklin thing.
Fantastic show.
I wanted to interview her. Playboy said yes. I'll tell you the interviews I didn't do that I wanted to do, that I had the assignment to do: Fred Astaire, Leonard Bernstein, Aretha Franklin, John Updike, Tom Wolfe come to mind, and Alfred Hitchcock. All of them I had thought I was doing, and all of them I had written questions for a lot. Some of them I was totally prepared to do, like Hitchcock and Leonard Bernstein, and they got canceled at the last minute. With Aretha, I hadn't prepared for Aretha, but I got the assignment, and she just didn't want to do Playboy. She didn't want to do it. Now, did I know that what I'm seeing in this movie, in the National Geographic thing,
Genius,
about her father being the womanizer he was, about the first husband? Did I know that she had a child when she was 14? She was pregnant. I'm learning it now. In my research, I was thinking about, I wonder if I had gotten the assignment, would I have known that stuff? Would that have been somewhere, or is that just coming out? A lot of this stuff. So that would be coming out in the research. Had I not known that, and had I done the interview and I had missed some of the really important early stuff, I would have been very disappointed with myself. So, but I think about those things still. When I see people, that I could have interviewed or that I did interview, I'm always curious to see if there's something I didn't know that I might have missed. But
how about any questions you'd want to take back?
The only question I would have taken back is the one I asked Warren Beatty about his tax, that he owed a lot of money in taxes, and it was over the phone because I hadn't gotten to it. And he said, let's finish this we'll continue on the phone. I said, great. So I called him. He called me. See, I didn't have his phone number. A lot of times they won't give you their phone number, but they'll call you. They either will or they won't, So he called, and I said, Warren, I said, I didn't ask you about this $1.7 million you owed in taxes, or whatever it was. And he just said, oh, Larry, I'm getting another call. Let me get back to you. And that was it. That was it. So yes, I would take that one back because I wanted to get more out of him. But in the most part, no, I don't regret it. I mean, Sid Caesar got angry with me when I asked him if he would be the professor. Because his character of the professor was very good, and I thought maybe I could ask him a couple of questions as the professor, right. and And he just got so mad at me. I was really surprised, you know.
Yeah.
And he just said, "I'm not a monkey. I don't perform on demand. You know, I get paid to do what I do. I'm not." And I'm sorry, you know. Too bad I missed getting the professor. But you know, I don't regret asking him that because I don't remind that response. I may have asked it too soon, and then I would have regretted. Maybe I should have asked it later, that kind of thing. But no, I don't really have regrets about anything I've asked that I could think of that come to
Right.
mind.
Let me ask some of the a couple of questions. I want to make sure I get them in. All right, on a bucket list, either historical figures or current figures, anybody that you still want to interview that you haven't gotten to yet.
No, the only one that really I would like to do as a book even is Bob Dylan. Um, uh, Bob Dylan to me, I listen to him all the time. You know, I still do. You know, I mean, we go, he's the one in my car. I have all of his CDs, and we, you know, whenever we travel anywhere, it's mostly Dylan and Tom Waits. I like him as well. Um, and I would like to do Tom Waits as well. Actually, I think that they're two fascinating characters to me. Not characters, but geniuses, you know, and they are in a sense that they're the voices that ring in my head. You know, it's the songs that they sing, it's the phrases that they use, so I would love to spend time with them. Um, you know, athletes, yeah, I think LeBron James is quite an interesting character because he's become political beyond the athlete. You know, I like that. Um, you know, Don DeLillo, Cormac McCarthy, you know, some of these novelists that, you know, that don't really talk, you know. Of course, Thomas Pynchon would be at the top of my list because nobody even knows if he's alive or dead anymore, but nobody knows what he looks like. You know, no, he's sort of the Salinger of his day. In the past, J.D. Salinger, of course, Greta Garbo, the people who didn't talk. Any pope, I'd do anything to interview a pope. You know, I mean that
How
would be
about
really.
how about somebody who talks too much, maybe Trump? Well, how would be? Would you like to
Oh,
interview him,
Trump,
and what would be
Trump,
your approach?
I would do Trump in a minute. But wouldn't be a minute actually. It would have. I'd need a month of preparation probably to do the minute. But you know, I know Trump would. I know it would be a
He's tough.
failure.
He steamrolls a lot of the in
But
the
he
video
does.
interviews. So
Yeah.
maybe getting them in long form,
No,
would
it's
be
the
a
only
better way
way.
to do
It's
it.
the only way. I wouldn't do it. I
Yeah.
wouldn't do this kind of interview with him because he would just press a button and it would be over. But he would also just kick me out anyway, you know, if I talk to him. But no, Trump would be, you know, at the top of my list of uh, wanting to see if I could penetrate the psyche. I think I succeeded with Bob Knight. And I think that Trump is very much like Bob Knight. So I think I would know how to be prepared for it, which would be flatter, flatter, flatter. You know, just build up his ego. Just say what a wonderful thing he did. Show, you know, Biden's doing. I'd be, you know, doing things through
Playing
my
the
teeth.
game. Yep.
Yeah, and then you know, every once in a while, trying to sneak in something that might get him to reveal himself a little bit more. But I don't know if he can reveal himself. You know, you're dealing with a man who is really self-delusional, I think. So I don't know if you'd ever get out of him.
So, Larry, you are an expert, and again, my special guest on Guys Radio, Larry Grobel, the world's greatest interviewer. You are an expert at unmasking people. Just for the benefit of our listeners and some of the folks who do podcasts or whatever, what are some of the key attributes that a interviewer really needs to have to be able to get beyond the mask?
Well, I think we talked in the very beginning. Number one, you have to be able to listen. So you know, if you're listening to somebody as they talk, there are certain you know, keep a notepad by your side, you know, so you can just take a note, you know, about something, so you can get back to something they said, you know, mother, father, you know, childhood accident, whatever it would be. Um, and you know, it's the same with any profession. It's really your preparation. If you're prepared, if you've done your research and you've done your homework. So if you're in school, you got to do your homework. You know, to me, writing is homework. You know, basically, it's people who like to do the essays when they were in high school and college and the papers they wrote. Well, what do you think you're doing when you're writing? You're expanding that. You're taking it to the next level. And when you're interviewing somebody, I think, you know, you want to your research is to read everything that you can possibly read about the person. If it's a novelist, you want to read their novels. If it's James Michener or Joyce Carol Oates, that's a huge assignment.
Sure.
I prepared. I spent 3 or 4 months before I would agree to see any of these people, because I would be reading every day and night. All I do is read their work. And I never got to read all of their work, but I at least read 10 books by each of them. I turned down doing Stephen King because I didn't want to read all of his work. I just, I like his work. I think he's a really good writer, but at the time I just didn't want to do it. I turned down Clint Eastwood because I didn't agree with a lot of what I was reading about. I said, well, why am I wasting my time talking to him? That was a mistake, but that was before he became a director. And I really would,
Okay.
I regret anything I've turned down, but that's the way it is.
Well, speaking of actors, with all your experience interviewing actors, what do you think of actors? Or do you think they're smarter than you expected or not? Or is it, I guess it's an individual case. The reason I'm asking that is, somebody once said to me, oh, models, dumb models or something. And I said, they're not, because look at the life experience they have. They travel, they hang around with rich people, they get exposed to many things that none of us get exposed to throughout our entire lives. And with actors, it's similar in that, they are engaging in a business that takes them worldwide travel. They're working with really super intelligent people, very creative people. What are your thoughts about that, Larry? What are your thoughts about your feelings about actors after having interviewed so many of them over the years? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it somewhat in between? Is it all individual?
No, it's definitely individual, but it is positive. I mean, when I interviewed Brando, and he said to me, what, how can you interview actors all the time? Don't you get bored? I mean, it's, and I said, Marlon, I said, you're all very different. I said, if I got bored, I would stop doing it. And I never stopped doing it in a sense, because if I would get asked to do certain people, I would do it. Look, Al Pacino didn't graduate high school. A lot of actors, never advanced their education. Jodie Foster did, but not, Sharon Stone,
David Duchovny.
There are a few that have, but for the most part, David Duchovny. But for the most part, a lot of them haven't. But they have, as you say, they have world experience that's very different. I asked Pacino, how do people react to you? How do especially when you're meeting the heads of studios and the people at the top, in a sense, of your profession. And he said everybody's nervous around him when they first meet him. Why? Because he's never really talked very much. He never gave a lot of interviews. He didn't give any until I talked to him for Playboy. So he was mysterious. Silent people like De Niro are mysterious people. You don't know if they're smart or not, but you get the sense from their acting, they could be pretty profoundly disturbing people, right?
Got it.
Everybody who met Al is like they were meeting Don Corleone, and he was the guy who just could give you with a stare, he could freeze you. And he told me that this happened to him all the time when he would walk into a meeting with the head of a studio. They were all very, very deferential to him, and he didn't say anything. He just kept quiet. I understood that. I mean, one time he was offered the Godfather 2. He said he wasn't going to do it. After the first, he wasn't thinking of doing a second one, and they had a suitcase or an attaché case on the desk, and they actually all opened it, and it was I don't know, $1 million or $2 million.
I love it.
Yeah, and he just looked at them like they were crazy. He wasn't going to take it and walk out. He just didn't say anything. Wow. So I have an appreciation for a lot of actors. I asked Freddie Prinze. I was in his bedroom, and he had no books on his bookshelf. There was nothing. They were empty. I said, "Where are your books?" And he says, "I don't have books." I said, "Really?" I said, "I collect first editions." He said, "What's that?" I mean, suddenly it's like I'm talking. But I said, "Well, what?" I said, I explained it to him. The first. He says, "I have some first issues of comic books that he had." Okay, that's where we'll go with it. Let's go that way. Now, I'm not saying he was stupid. but I'm saying he was uneducated, but then we got into why, we got into, and we got, and the same thing with Chris O'Donnell. I interviewed him once, and he was like 20, 25 at the time. And I was asking him some philosophical questions or deeper questions. And he said, I can't, my father can answer that. I can't answer that. Right. You know what I mean? It was like, at least he was upfront and open. And, so you sort of like, you see where they're at intellectually, educationally, and then you can go with that. If they're readers, they like books, they like to talk about, Alice Munro or John Updike or Ulysses, great, I'll go there with them. If they'd rather talk about comic books and cartoons, I'll go there with them, wherever they're comfortable. Okay. But they're all different.
Okay. Last question. The rewards of your work. I find for myself, just doing this work, interviewing people is such a pleasure, because maybe I've interviewed over 500 people and they're all experts in a specific area. And that allows me to get some information on all 500 areas. Now, 499 of those people, they don't know much about the other areas that I'm interviewing people about. So for me as an interviewer, my reward is learning so much about humanity, about all these different skill sets, etc. What is your greatest reward as being the world's greatest interviewer been throughout your career, Larry?
Number one, I'm not the world's greatest interviewer. That's like, let's dispel that one. Okay.
Who is?
There is no world's greatest interviewer. Okay. So, but it's like Joyce Carol Oates wrote that thing about me being the Mozart of interviewers, and I'm thinking, okay, so who's the Chopin, who's the Beethoven, who's the Tchaikovsky? I mean, it's a little bit, it's going to go on my grave site. So,
greatest reward from your work?
I think it's the same thing. I think it's the fact that it has allowed me to enter so many different disciplines, so many different fields. I didn't know much about the great sculptures until I did Henry Moore. I didn't know really much about the science when I went to see Linus Pauling, and I started to try to understand the general theory of anesthesia, which is what he came up with, and and sickle cell anemia, which he understood these things. I didn't, but I read about them. I got so it's like advanced, it's like a graduate school. You're constantly learning about different things. With James Michener, the guy was writing about everything. He was writing about in Centennial or whatever. He's writing about, if first the dinosaurs happen, and then comes this, and then comes that, and then we get to man. So I'm basically studying all the time and thinking about it. They make me think about things that I hadn't thought about before. And so I'm being enriched. And in a sense, that's why, in a sense, I can have a conversation with anybody, because as you know, when you talk to a lot of different people and you do prepare for them, you are enriching yourself. You may not be. What I learned, I used to have so many stories, Robert, that I would talk about. I've had a very eclectic life. I've traveled a lot. I lived 3 years in Africa. I spent a year traveling abroad. And I've been in India. I've married a Japanese woman. I had an African girlfriend. I had a Dutch girlfriend. So I've had a kind of a full life in a lot of ways, and so I'm very lucky to have lived a life like this. But when I would talk to people, they would like to hear these stories. Brando loved my stories. It's spent days talking about these things, but they were in my head so much too, and I got tired of telling my own stories. I wanted new stories, right? So I wrote a memoir. I got it out of my life. You Show Me Yours is about the first 30 years of my life. All of the sex craziness, all of the traveling, and the right up through dealing with Streisand for 8-9 months, and dealing with Brando and being on his island, meeting my wife, having a child. End of story. I got rid of all those things in my head. I didn't know that's what would happen. But it did. It was like because I put it on paper, I stopped thinking about them. I haven't told those stories in years that were in my head. I haven't told the stories that are in the book, and I've opened my mind up for new stories. And so you learn about that, and it's one of the wonderful benefits of writing, is that you learn that if you write something down, if you get a story out, you don't think about it. What I find lately, I've written 20 news stories since January. I see now I'll have a third storybook, but I've been writing them so quickly. I don't know why it's never happened like this before. That when I go back, I see a title that I just wrote about 3 weeks ago. I don't remember what the story was, so it's like new to me. It's kind of an exciting thing.
You're in the flow, Larry. You're in the
Yeah,
flow
yeah,
right now. Keep it going. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, listen, we're tight on time. I apologize. I gotta interrupt here because we're gonna end the first part of today's second part of our two interview series with Larry Grobel. What we're going to do, folks, I'm going to wrap this part, but then we're going to take a quick pause. And then what we're going to do is Larry's going to interview me. So I'll get some more lessons there. And then Larry's going to read a couple of his stories, his short stories that he's been talking about. So first, to put a button on today's interview, first of all, thank you. You may not think you're the world's greatest interviewer, but to me, you are, and you're a great inspiration. I really love your work. And I love your writing because it's very easy to digest, yet it has a lot of meaning to it. And you've been a great inspiration to me. And I'm very, very appreciative of you spending the time with me. And I learned a lot through both of these interviews on the fly. So thank you very much, Larry Grobel, for being my special guest on Guys Radio.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure talking to you, Robert, and I'm sure we'll do it again when there's
I hope
another
so.
new book coming out.
I hope so. That would be great.